You are in Braunau, standing by the Inn River. The water moves lazily, reflecting the muted sun of early spring. The family's home is ordinary, though Adolf Hitler, the father, walks with a stiff back, a man used to being obeyed. He's a customs official, proud and demanding. His wife Clara is the soft, balanced, gentle patient, always protecting her children from Alois's temper. You watch young Adolf sitting by a small window, sketching birds on scraps of paper. He's quiet, withdrawn, and easily lost in his own world. He's not much of a student, though he insists he knows more than his teachers. When reprimanded, he doesn't argue, he stares back in silence, his pride swelling like a knot in his chest. Historians still argue whether his father's harshness or his mother's affection shaped him more. Some say Alois's strictness built a boy who craved control, while others believe Clara's tenderness made him sensitive and desperate for approval. Either way, you sense the tension building early, the mix of love and fear that will never leave him. The Hitlers move, often, following Alois's work. Each town blurs into the next, each school another chance for conflict. Adolf dreams of something grander. He talks of becoming a priest once, then an artist, then something undefined but important. In Linz, a larger town where they finally settle, he spends more time at the opera than in class. He's drawn to Wagner's music, the soaring drama, the heroic battles, the myths of destiny. It feels personal to him. One little-known detail is how obsessed he becomes with stage design. He sketches elaborate sets in his notebooks, imagining worlds of marble and light, long before he ever dreams of political stages. He even tells friends that one day he'll be famous, though no one quite believes him. At 13, his father dies suddenly of a lung hemorrhage. Adolf is relieved more than sad. Without his father's control, he feels free, though that freedom quickly turns heavy. His mother falls ill often, and money becomes tight. Yet she indulges his artistic ambitions, letting him skip school to draw. You can almost see him, sitting on the edge of the Linz Bridge, looking out over the Danube, promising himself that he'll prove everyone wrong. He's convinced that greatness isn't about following rules, it's about breaking them. Still, his confidence isn't matched by action. He fails his exams, argues with teachers, and spends more time dreaming than doing. The headmaster tells Clara that her son is wasting his talent, that his arrogance hides insecurity. She nods softly but never scolds him. She believes he's special. When he turns 16, tuberculosis takes his younger brother Edmund. The loss shakes the family. But for Adolf, it does something else. It makes him withdraw completely. Friends disappear, laughter fades. He walks alone, hands in pockets, muttering to himself about fate and destiny. Historians still debate how much of his later worldview formed here in these lonely walks along the Austrian hillsides. Some say it was simply a lost boy trying to find direction. Others suggest the seeds of something darker were already taking root. Then comes 1903, and Alois is gone. 2 years later, Clara's health begins to fail. She suffers from breast cancer, and Adolf, barely 17, watches helplessly as she weakens. Her doctor, a kind Jewish physician named Dr. Bloch, does everything he can. Adolf calls him an angel. It's a strange and haunting detail, knowing what the future holds, that one of the last people he ever thanks sincerely is Jewish. When Clara dies, Adolf breaks down. Neighbors remember his screams echoing through the house. For months after, he drifts. There's no plan, no purpose, only drawings, the smell of paint, and dreams of Vienna. Vienna, the city of art, the heart of culture. That's where he believes destiny is waiting. You follow him as he boards a train alone, carrying a small suitcase and a folder of sketches. He's poor, nervous, but filled with hope. He'll take the entrance exam for the Academy of Fine Arts. He'll make it. He's sure of it. The train pulls away from Linz, the countryside passing in soft shades of green and brown. He stares out the window, imagining applause, galleries, fame. What he doesn't know yet is that failure waits for him at the other end of that track. And so the boy from Braunau leaves behind his family, his grief, and everything familiar, chasing the dream of being seen, of being someone. The city ahead will change him in ways even he cannot yet imagine. You arrive in Vienna with a young man, stepping off the train into a city that feels alive in every direction. The streets hum with trams, horse carriages, and chatter and accents from across the empire. Vienna at the turn of the century is a place of contradictions: grand palaces beside crowded tenements, art galleries beside soup kitchens, laughter mixing with the echo of hunger. Adolf walks through it all, wide-eyed, his portfolio tucked under his arm. The Academy of Fine Arts sits on a hill, tall and white, like a promise. He believes this is where his future begins. He hands over his drawings, carefully shaded buildings, dramatic arches, neat perspectives. But when the results come, the rejection stings like cold air. The letter says his architectural skill is fine, but his human figures are weak. They suggest he apply to the School of Architecture instead. He doesn't. Instead, he paces the streets, furious at the idea that someone else could judge his worth. You watch him sit in a cheap cafe, staring at the envelope in his hands, and you can almost feel the bitterness building. He blames the examiners, the system, the world. Historians still argue whether this was the true turning point when disappointment began to twist into resentment. Some say it was just youthful pride. Others believe this rejection planted the first deep seed of hostility toward authority and those he saw as obstacles. Still, he doesn't give up immediately. The next year he tries again, armed with new sketches, but the answer is the same. Rejected this time, there's no recovery. His savings run out, and soon the dream dissolves into cold nights on park benches. You see him sleeping under bridges near the Danube, his few belongings wrapped in a coat that no longer fits. Vienna, once glowing with art and opportunity, becomes a maze of hunger and shame. He eats stale bread, sometimes nothing at all, yet even in misery he watches the city like a student. He studies faces workers, soldiers, beggars, merchants. He listens to political debates in beer halls, arguments about the empire's future and the rise of nationalism. Vienna is a crossroads of ideas: German pride, socialist reform, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and fading imperial grandeur. He absorbs it all, silently, shaping beliefs he doesn't yet have the words for. There's a little-known fact that during these years he earned small coins by painting postcards and selling them to tourists. His partner in this tiny business is a man of Jewish descent, and by all accounts, they get along well enough. This detail baffles many historians later. It's as a quiet reminder that his early life wasn't defined by hate but by struggle. You picture him hunched over a table in a men's dormitory, painting cathedrals and bridges while men cough around him. The walls are cracked, the air smells of damp wool and tobacco. Outside, carriages roll past the Ringstrasse carrying the wealthy to the opera. Inside, he paints, eats soup when he can, and dreams of recognition. By 1909, the city's mood begins to darken. Unemployment rises, and politics grows louder. You can almost hear the speeches, voices calling for unity, others for separation. The newspapers shout about decline, corruption, betrayal. For a man like Adolf, already wounded by failure, the noise becomes a strange comfort. He starts believing that someone must be responsible for all this chaos. Historians still debate how much influence Vienna's political climate had on his later ideology. Some say he merely echoed what he heard. Others argue he found in those speeches the language to justify his frustration. Either way, he begins to listen closely to the far-right pamphlets, the angry orators, the talk of purity and strength. Yet, amid all this, his letters to his family remain oddly gentle. To his half-sister Paula, he writes about art and music. He still speaks fondly of his mother, even years after her death. There's a strange divide forming inside him, a soft sentimentality and a growing hardness toward the world. When the First World War breaks out in 1914, he's still in Vienna, drifting without purpose. But suddenly, there's something that stirs him, a call to arms, a sense of belonging he's never felt. He moves to Munich, volunteering for the German army. He's thrilled when accepted. It's the first time anyone says yes to him before he leaves. He takes one last walk through the city that made and broke him. The cafes are still busy, the opera houses still bright, but he no longer sees beauty in them. He sees only weakness, decay, and indulgence. You can almost hear his inner voice promising that he'll rise above it all someday. A curious tidbit survives from those last months in Vienna. A police report mentions him by name: Adolf Hitler, painter, without fixed residence. The note is small, unremarkable, written in fading ink. No one reading it then could imagine that this homeless man would one day hold Europe in fear. As the train to Munich pulls away, he leans out the window, watching Vienna disappear behind the fog. He doesn't know what lies ahead, but he feels that this time, fate is with him. The boy who once dreamed of painting cathedrals is heading toward the trenches, carrying with him hunger, bitterness, and the belief that destiny owes him something. You stay with him as the rails click beneath the wheels, carrying him from art to war, from rejection to something far more dangerous. You arrive in Munich in the summer of 1913, just as Europe hums with tension. The city feels lighter than Vienna, with open squares, markets, and beer gardens filled with laughter. Adolf rents a small room, paints a little, reads newspapers, and keeps mostly to himself. He's calmer here, though still restless, waiting for something that feels like purpose. He doesn't have long to wait. When the news breaks that Austria has declared war on Serbia, a spark catches fire across Europe. Within weeks, the continent is at war. Crowds cheer in the streets, waving flags and singing national songs. You stand among them as Adolf joins the throng, eyes shining, as if he's finally found the belonging he's been missing his entire life. He volunteers for the German army, not the Austrian. It, as a strange detail, he is technically still an Austrian citizen, but he feels German to his core. To his surprise, the army accepts him. In the fall of 1914, he's sent to the Western Front, a young soldier surrounded by mud, barbed wire, and the echo of artillery. You march with him through the rain and into the trenches. The air is thick with smoke, the ground cold and soaked with water. Every day is a rhythm of waiting and fear, of letters home and shells overhead. Yet he thrives in the order of it. For once, everything is simple commands. Loyalty, comradeship, no politics, no rejection, just duty. He becomes a dispatch runner, carrying messages between lines. It's one of the most dangerous jobs, and yet he volunteers for it eagerly. Bullets whistle past, shells explode nearby, but he never hesitates. His comrades call him strange but brave. He barely speaks, keeps to himself, and doesn't drink. Instead, he paints little sketches of destroyed villages and writes in his notebook about destiny and honor. Historians still argue whether the war hardened him or gave him a sense of purpose he'd been searching for all along. Some say it gave him structure. Others believe it planted bitterness that would later explode. There's one well-known fact that gives him a small measure of pride. He earns the Iron Cross, both first and second class, for bravery. It's rare for someone of his rank, and it means everything to him. You can picture him holding the medal in his hand, polishing it in the candlelight of a dugout, feeling for the first time that he truly matters. But the war is brutal. You hear the screams, the constant thunder of guns, the cries for medics that sometimes go unanswered. During one battle near the Somme, he's buried briefly by an explosion, coughing up dirt, dazed but alive. In another, he's hit by shrapnel, carried off to a field hospital, and spends weeks recovering. He writes letters home during this time, strangely calm ones, filled with reflections on discipline, courage, and fate. One little-known detail is that he kept a dog named Foxel, a stray he found near the front lines. He trained it to do tricks, shared his rations with it, and seemed more at ease around the animal than around people. When the dog was stolen by another soldier, he was devastated, reportedly crying openly. It's a fleeting, almost tender moment in an otherwise grim chapter of his life. As the war drags on, morale crumbles. By 1918, Germany is exhausted. Soldiers desert, food runs out, and rumors of surrender spread. For Adolf, it's unthinkable. He can't accept that Germany, the nation he worships, could lose. Then, in October, it happens. A gas attack near Ypres blinds him temporarily. You follow him to a hospital in Payswalk where he lies in darkness for days, eyes burning, heartbreaking. It's there, lying in that hospital bed, that he hears the news Germany has surrendered. The Kaiser has abdicated. The empire he loved has fallen. For him, it's not just a military defeat. It's a personal one. He weeps, not from pain, but from rage. Historians still debate what truly went through his mind in that moment. Some say it was despair. Others believe it was the birth of his obsession with revenge. He later describes it as his most terrible experience. When his sight slowly returns, he leaves the hospital no longer as a soldier, but as a man with a mission. He swears that someone must pay for this humiliation, that the betrayal came from within. The myths that spread through Germany, the stab in the back, the idea that traitors, communists, and Jews caused the loss, become his new belief system. He returns to Munich, a city full of soldiers like him, disillusioned and angry. They gather in beer halls, talking of revolution and revenge. He has no money, no job, but he finds comfort in the crowds, in the speeches that echo his own feelings. There's a small but telling event here. A government officer sends him to spy on a small political group, the German Workers' Party. He goes reluctantly, expecting nothing, but when he stands up to argue with one of the speakers, the crowd listens. His words come out sharp, full of conviction. For the first time, people applaud him that night. He's invited to join. He accepts. He doesn't know it yet, but this tiny, forgotten group will become the stage where his voice will find power. The soldier who once ran through gunfire now runs on anger and ambition. The medals he earned lie tucked away in a drawer, replaced by something new, a sense that destiny has called on him once again, and this time, he won't let it slip away. You find yourself back in Munich with him. The war over, but the world uneasy. The city feels hollow, as if its soul has been scraped thin by loss and hunger. Soldiers wander the streets without uniforms or purpose, the smell of smoke and cheap beer hanging heavy in the air. It's 1919, and Germany is struggling to breathe again after defeat. You walk beside him as he stands in a beer hall filled with shouting men. Everyone has an opinion about who's to blame for the disaster: politicians, communists, foreigners, anyone but themselves. The air buzzes with anger and desperation. He listens, quiet at first, until someone says something that cuts too deep. He stands up and begins to speak. His voice, sharp and trembling with emotion, fills the room. People turn. There's something magnetic in it, not eloquence, but intensity. Words tumble out like bullets, furious, precise, impossible to ignore. By the time he finishes, the room has fallen silent. He's not just a man speaking, he's a spark catching flame. The next day, members of the small German Workers' Party approach him. They offer him membership. Not knowing they've just handed him the stage of his life, he accepts. At first the party is tiny, barely a few dozen men. Meetings happen in smoky back rooms, the furniture mismatched, the posters hand-painted, but when he speaks, people keep coming back. He talks about unity, strength, pride, and vengeance. His sentences rise and fall like waves, drawing the crowd in, lifting them, giving them something to believe in again. Historians still argue whether his power came from conviction or performance. Some say he believed every word. Others claim he simply sensed what people wanted to hear and gave it to them with perfect rhythm. A little-known fact from these early meetings is that he paid close attention to lighting. He'd position himself under a single lamp so the shadows made his face sharper. He rehearsed gestures in front of mirrors, timing his pauses. Even here, in cheap halls, he was crafting not just speeches but theater. You watch him grow bolder. He begins designing flags, creating a symbol, a black swastika inside a white circle on a red background. It's simple, striking, impossible to forget. To him, symbols matter as much as words. They make emotion visible. The party changes its name in 1922, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. The crowds grow. He's now the speaker, the one who can move hearts and make strangers shout in unison. You can feel the strange power of it in the air, the mix of hope, pride, and fear. But outside the beer halls, Germany is chaos. Inflation skyrockets. A loaf of bread that once cost a few pfennigs now costs millions of marks. People carry money in wheelbarrows. Children play with bundles of worthless notes. Desperation becomes a way of life. For him, it's the perfect storm. He blames the government, the Treaty of Versailles, and what he calls corruption from within. The people listen because they need someone to blame, and he gives them a story that makes sense of their suffering. There's a strange mix in his life during these years. He's surrounded by loyal followers, young men who hang on his every word, but privately, he's still solitary. He lives modestly, eats simply, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink. He spends nights planning, drawing, dreaming. In 1923, he feels ready to take it all. Inspired by Mussolini's rise in Italy, he decides to stage a Chua march on Berlin, beginning in Munich. You stand beside him in the packed Bürgerbücher beer hall as he bursts in with armed men, firing a shot into the ceiling. The national revolution has begun, he shouts. The crowd freezes. For a few hours, it seems as if he might actually succeed. But by morning, everything unravels. The police fire on the marchers. 16 of his followers die on the street. He's arrested, charged with treason, and taken to Landsberg prison. Historians still debate whether he truly believed he could seize power that day or if it was all meant to test his reach. Either way, it becomes a myth for his movement, the failed revolt that would one day be avenged. There's an odd, almost cinematic moment at his trial. Instead of denying guilt, he uses the courtroom as a stage, delivering speeches that turn him from a criminal into a nationalist hero. Reporters write about him with fascination. His name spreads beyond Munich for the first time. In prison, he's treated lightly. The guards admire him. His cell is bright and clean. Visitors bring food, books, and flowers. He spends his days walking in circles, talking endlessly with his secretary, Rudolf Hess. He feels calm, even content, as if failure was just another rehearsal. You can see him sitting by the window of his cell, pen in hand, beginning to write the words that will shape his destiny. A book, a manifesto, a blueprint for what he believes the future should be. For the first time, his thoughts leave his head and take form on paper. And though the world outside hardly notices yet, history is quietly shifting. You are with him in the quiet of Landsberg prison, where the air smells faintly of chalk and old stone. Sunlight falls through the barred window in neat stripes across the table where he sits, writing. Outside, the fields sway gently, and the guards stroll without hurry. It doesn't feel like punishment, it feels like retreat, like the world has paused so he can plan his next move. He writes every day, long hours of pacing, dictating, rewriting. The book he's creating is part autobiography, part ideology. He calls it Mein Kampf, My Struggle. You listen as he describes his beliefs in long, obsessive passages, his vision for Germany, his hatred of communism, his ideas about race, and his dream of expansion. Historians still argue whether he meant every word or if it was half the fantasy of a man nursing humiliation. His friend and secretary Rudolf Hess types the pages, listening as he speaks with sharp conviction. They discuss destiny, fate, and leadership. He believes he has been chosen by history itself, that all his failures were preparation. He says that words are weapons stronger than guns, and here, in this quiet cell, he sharpens them. A lesser-known fact is that he spends as much time sketching as he does writing. He draws buildings, grand halls, and city plans, massive, symmetrical, coldly beautiful. The architect in him never really died. It simply changed shape. What he once dreamed of building with stone, he now dreams of building with people. Life in Landsberg is strangely gentle. Supporters send him gifts and letters. Sympathetic guards let him take walks in the courtyard and even pose for photographs. He reads endlessly history, philosophy, and propaganda. He absorbs everything that might feed his sense of purpose. When his sentence is reduced after less than a year, he leaves prison in December 1924. He walks out to find a different Germany, one slightly more stable, less chaotic. His movement, weakened by his imprisonment, is almost forgotten, but he doesn't panic. He knows time is on his side. You watch him rebuild slowly, carefully. He reorganizes the Nazi party with military precision, setting up branches, youth leagues, and newspapers. The brown-uniformed paramilitary, the SA, begins marching again through Munich streets. They hand out leaflets, wave flags, and chant slogans that are easy to remember and impossible to ignore. Historians still debate how deliberate his new approach was. Some think he learned from his failure, realizing that power must be taken through politics, not force. Others believe he simply waited for the right storm. During this time, his public image changes. He dresses sharply, speaks more calmly, and avoids direct violence. When he steps onto a stage now, the crowd sees not a rebel but a statesman. He speaks of rebuilding Germany, restoring honor, and creating jobs. He promises stability. To a country exhausted by inflation and unemployment, those words sound like music. A small, curious detail from this period. He keeps a personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, who captures every expression, every gesture. Later, he studies the images carefully, choosing which angles make him look strongest. Every salute, every pause, every gaze is rehearsed. By 1930, the world changes again. The Great Depression hits, and Germany's fragile economy collapses. Factories close, banks fail, and millions lose their jobs. Anger fills the streets once more. He feels the moment rising like a wave, and this time, he's ready to ride it. You can almost see him standing before massive crowds, tens of thousands gathered in open fields, torches flickering in the night. His voice echoes through loudspeakers, carried across the dark. He talks about unity, renewal, pride. People weep as they cheer. They believe he understands them, that he's one of them. One well-known fact is how skillfully he uses radio and film to reach every corner of Germany. His speeches are recorded, replayed, and analyzed. Posters with his image fill the streets. Children learn songs about him in school. His name becomes a symbol of hope for some, and a warning for others. Still, not everyone is convinced. Many see him as dangerous, a demagogue with no real plan. Historians still argue how much of his rise was due to his own skill or the failures of those around him who underestimated him. By 1932, his party becomes the largest in the Reichstag. The president, Paul von Hindenburg, old and weary, faces pressure from all sides. Some politicians believe they can use him, control him by offering a share of power. It's a fatal miscalculation. In January 1933, the call finally comes. Hindenburg names him Chancellor of Germany. You stand with him at the window of the Chancellery looking out over Berlin as torchlight parades march below. The crowd chants his name, their voices blending into a single rhythm. He doesn't smile, he simply nods, as if he always knew this moment would come. The man who once slept in Vienna's shelters now commands a nation. The dream of control that began in a sketchbook has become real. Yet as you look into his eyes that night, you sense something darker stirring beneath the triumph, a hunger that will never be satisfied, and a future that will turn this victory into the world's nightmare. You stand beside him as the doors of the Chancellery close behind him, the echo of cheering crowds fading into the marble halls. The air inside is polished, heavy with authority. He walks slowly, his boots clicking against the floor, taking in the portraits of emperors and generals who came before. For a moment he says nothing, then quietly, almost to himself, he murmurs that history has finally opened its door. At first, the world outside barely understands what has happened. He speaks of unity, work and order. He promises calm after years of chaos. Factories reopen, unemployment drops, the streets are swept clean. Many Germans, weary of instability, breathe easier. The newspapers print his image with admiration. Some even call it a miracle. You see him in his office, carefully reading every word printed about him. He circles phrases in red pencil, noting who praises him and who does not. Control, for him, is not just about politics, it's about narrative. He understands the power of appearance. The man who once studied stage lighting now studies human behavior on a national scale. But beneath the calm surface, changes begin to tighten. Political opponents vanish from parliament. Newspapers are censored, books are banned. Secret police, soon to be called the Gestapo, begin keeping quiet lists of names. Historians still argue whether he planned this total control from the start, or if it grew step by step, each justified by fear and crisis. Then, one night in February 1933, a fire burns through the Reichstag building, the symbol of German democracy. Flames rise into the sky, lighting the city like a warning. He seizes the moment, declaring a national emergency. Within hours, civil liberties are suspended. Thousands are arrested. With a single decree, democracy collapses in silence. You can almost hear the unease among those who once thought they could control him. Hindenburg, the aging president, grows wary. Others whisper of caution. But when the Enabling Act passes in March, giving him power to make laws without parliament, it's already too late. The Republic is over. A lesser-known detail from those early months. He still lived modestly, avoiding displays of luxury. He ate simple vegetarian meals, drank tea, and kept a strict daily routine. It was part habit, part image. He wanted to appear as a man of discipline, not indulgence. His charisma came not from warmth, but from certainty. You follow him to Nuremberg, where the first massive rallies are staged. Tens of thousands gather under banners stretching into the night, illuminated by columns of light that seem to pierce the sky. The air vibrates with chants, drums, and the rhythm of marching boots. It feels choreographed like a dream or a nightmare. He steps onto the platform, raises his hand, and the entire crowd freezes. For a moment, the silence is total. Then he speaks, his voice rising in measured tones, building like music. He promises greatness, purity, renewal. You can feel the pull of it, the way words become a kind of spell. Historians still debate how much he believed in the myth he created. Some say he was an actor trapped in his own performance. Others insist he was utterly convinced of his mission. Perhaps it was both. By 1934, the last obstacles fall away. When President Hindenburg dies, he combines the offices of President and Chancellor, declaring himself *Führer, leader of the German nation. Soldiers swear loyalty not to the state, but to him personally. For the first time he holds complete power, yet he's restless. He spends long hours in meetings, reviewing architectural plans for his dream capital, a city he calls Germania, vast boulevards, triumphal arches, and domes larger than anything the world has seen. The failed artist inside him resurfaces, now designing not canvases but entire cities meant to reflect his vision of perfection. There's a small, surprising moment from these years. He often takes walks alone late at night in the gardens of the Chancellery, talking softly to himself. Guards report hearing him speak about destiny, fate, and fear of failure. It's a strange echo of the lonely young man in Vienna, still chasing validation. The propaganda machine builds his image to near divine levels. Posters show him surrounded by children, flowers, and adoring faces. Schoolbooks tell stories of his genius. The greeting Heil Hitler replaces everyday hellos. For millions he becomes not just a leader but a belief. Still, there are whispers. Some in his circle fear his growing obsession with racial purity, his plans to remake society along dangerous lines. Laws begin excluding Jewish citizens from professions, schools, and public life. People disappear quietly from their homes, replaced by silence and rumor. He insists these measures are necessary, calling them purification. The same drive for perfection that once shaped his art now shapes his ideology. The tragedy is that he believes it's creation, not cruelty. In private, he begins preparing for something even larger. His speeches shift from unity to destiny, from peace to expansion. He speaks of reclaiming land, of giving the German people what he calls living space. He studies maps, draws borders, dreams of conquest. And so as the world applauds his apparent success, Germany's recovery, its new pride, its disciplined few understand that the next act of his story is already being written in his mind. The applause outside only hides the storm that is gathering within. You find yourself walking through long hallways filled with maps, pins, and red lines stretching across Europe. He stands before them, eyes gleaming with intensity, tracing imaginary borders with the tip of a pencil. Each motion feels deliberate, like a painter designing his next masterpiece. But this time, the canvas is the continent itself. It begins quietly. In 1936, his troops march into the Rhineland, a forbidden zone, according to the treaty that ended the First World War. Many expect France or Britain to react, to push back, but nothing happens. The gamble pays off. He realizes something important that day. The world is hesitant, and hesitation, in his hands, becomes power. You can almost feel his confidence swell. Each victory, even a small one, feeds the larger illusion of destiny. Historians still debate whether he planned the full conquest from the start, or whether each step simply encouraged the next. Either way, by now, he feels unstoppable. He moves on to Austria, the land of his birth. In 1938, his troops cross the border without resistance. Crowds greet him with cheers, flowers, and tears. The union he calls the Anschluss feels to him like a homecoming, the fulfillment of a long-held dream. Cameras capture every smile, every salute. The propaganda machine spins it as proof that all Germans long to be united under one flag. Behind closed doors, though, he's already looking further. He wants Czechoslovakia next. European leaders desperate to avoid another war meet with him. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously waves a piece of paper upon returning home, declaring peace for our time. You almost want to believe it, but he doesn't stop. Within months, the rest of Czechoslovakia is taken. A lesser-known moment from these months, he often retreats to his mountain home, the Berghof overlooking the Alps. There, between meetings, he feeds his dog Blondie, drinks herbal tea, and watches films. His favorite movies are comedies. Sometimes he laughs so hard that guests feel uneasy, unsure whether to join in. It's a strange, human image, this man who seems capable of both charm and cruelty, laughter and cold silence. In the summer of 1939, he signs a pact with the Soviet Union. The world is stunned. Two ideologies that claim to despise each other now stand side by side, at least on paper, but the agreement is pragmatic. It clears the way for his next move, Poland. You stand with him in the war room on the eve of the invasion. The air hums with tension. Generals murmur over maps. Ticking clocks fill the silence. At dawn, on September 1st, 1939, the first shots are fired. Columns of tanks roll forward. Planes slice through the morning sky. The Second World War has begun. He watches the news unfold with satisfaction. It has started, he whispers. Within weeks, Poland falls. Britain and France declare war, but he seems unconcerned. To him, this is not chaos, it's choreography. The same control he once applied to speeches and rallies now extends to armies and nations. By 1940, his forces move west. One by one, countries collapse: Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally France. The German flag flies over Paris. He visits the city in triumph, briefly pausing before Napoleon's tomb. For him, it's a moment of symbolic victory, a whisper from history itself. Yet there's something else in his eyes, now not just pride, but hunger. Britain stands alone, defiant across the Channel. He orders relentless air raids, hoping to crush morale. London burns night after night, but the British spirit holds. Historians still argue whether this was his first major mistake, underestimating not just military resistance, but human resilience. At the same time, he turns east again. The pact with the Soviets, once convenient, now feels like a chain he's eager to break. He convinces himself that conquering the Soviet Union will secure the empire he dreams of. Advisors warn him of the dangers: winter, distance, logistics. But he waves them away. He has always trusted instinct over caution. There's a curious, little-known fact from this period. Before the invasion of the Soviet Union, he ordered the construction of a massive map room in his headquarters, with walls covered entirely in regions he planned to conquer. He would stand there for hours, lost in thought, sometimes moving pins by only a few centimeters. Each adjustment seemed to soothe him, as though geography itself obeyed his will. Meanwhile, his ideology grows darker. Laws intensify, targeting Jews, Roma, and others he deems undesirable. Camps expand quietly across occupied territories. The system of persecution that began with words and laws now takes on a horrifying industrial scale. Yet to his closest followers, he rarely speaks of the details. He prefers to talk in grand terms. Solutions, destiny, purity. It's as if abstraction shields him from reality. Even as the machinery of war consumes millions, he still thinks of himself as an artist reshaping the world. The tragedy, of course, is that his art is destruction. By 1941, the world is engulfed. His armies stretch from the Atlantic to the edge of Moscow. His portrait hangs in schools and offices. His speeches broadcast across continents. Yet behind the triumph lies the same pattern that followed him all his life, a rise so steep it almost begs for a fall. You watch him stare into maps again, the pencil trembling slightly in his hand. He talks of history remembering him forever. Perhaps it will, he says softly, but not, he adds, in the way others expect. And as snow begins to fall on the Eastern Front, quietly, almost imperceptibly, the tide begins to turn. You stand beside him in the dimly lit bunker room where maps cover every wall, but the lines no longer move forward. Winter has settled across the Eastern Front, and reports from the field grow darker each day. The invasion that began with lightning speed now crawls through snow and mud. Soldiers freeze, supplies vanish, and what was supposed to be a quick victory stretches into disaster. He refuses to believe it at first. They will hold, he says quietly, staring at the reports from Stalingrad, but they don't. In February 1943, the last German troops surrendered there. Nearly an entire army is lost. Historians still argue whether this was the moment the war was truly lost, or if hope lingered a little longer. Either way, something changes in him after Stalingrad. The confidence begins to crack. Still, he tries to maintain the image of control. In public, his speeches stay fiery, full of defiance and destiny. He insists that Germany will never surrender, that fate itself is on their side. But behind closed doors, you can feel his exhaustion. His hands tremble slightly when he signs documents. He spends long hours pacing, mumbling to himself, rearranging papers on his desk. In the evenings he retreats to his private quarters, where Blondie, his loyal dog, waits at his feet. He strokes her fur in silence, lost in thought. He no longer enjoys films or music. Food is tasteless to him. His circle grows smaller. Those who disagree are dismissed or worse. Fear replaces loyalty. By now, the Allies are advancing from the west, and the Soviets from the east. Bombs fall on German cities every night. The streets that once cheered his name are now filled with rubble and smoke. Still, he speaks of secret weapons, miracle turns, of victory just around the corner. His generals exchange uneasy looks but say nothing. To contradict him means ruin. There's a curious detail from this period. He becomes increasingly obsessed with astrology and prophecies, even consulting a few in secret. One claimed that the stars predicted his survival, another that a great empire must collapse before peace returns. He listens carefully, searching for patterns that confirm what he wants to believe. It's as if reason, once his strength, has given way to superstition. Meanwhile, his health declines. He walks with a stiff, jerky motion. One hand sometimes shakes uncontrollably. Doctors whisper about Parkinson's disease, though no one dares to tell him directly. His eyes grow darker, more sunken. He isolates himself in underground headquarters like the Wolf's Lair and later in Berlin, rarely seeing daylight. Even so, he continues to give orders. When his armies retreat, he calls them cowards. When cities fall, he blames betrayal. He orders scorched earth policies, demanding that Germany destroy its own infrastructure rather than let it fall to the enemy. His world has become a shrinking circle of control, and he clings to it desperately. Historians still debate whether he truly believed he could turn the war around, or whether he simply refused to face the truth. Some describe it as delusion, others as pure denial. But when you look at him pacing in that narrow room, eyes unfocused, the answer feels simpler. He couldn't imagine a world without him at the center of it. There's a moment of quiet irony in these years. The man who once designed grand cities now lives in bunkers and ruins. His dream of perfection lies buried under the rubble of his own making. He speaks of loyalty and destiny, yet the people outside the walls suffer hunger, fear, and loss. The empire he promised to last 1,000 years is collapsing in less than 12. In 1944, an assassination attempt nearly kills him. A bomb placed by officers explodes during a meeting, shaking the room and killing several men. He survives with minor injuries, a few burns and cuts, but the event deepens his paranoia. He sees traitors everywhere, even among his closest followers. Thousands are arrested, tortured, executed. The regime grows even harsher in its final year. At the same time, the full horror of what was happening in the concentration camps becomes undeniable. Millions of lives are extinguished in a machinery of death unlike anything the world has seen. It's here that history turns cold. You can feel the weight of silence, the way words struggle to hold the scale of it. Historians still debate how directly he managed each part of the system, but what is certain is that his ideology built it and his power sustained it. You stand beside him again, late at night, as distant artillery thunders outside Berlin. He sits at a large table covered with reports that no longer make sense. The numbers don't add up, the victories are illusions. His generals speak in hushed voices, trying to soften the truth. But he knows, somewhere inside, he knows, a small, little-known moment from these final months. He spends hours studying architectural sketches of a new Berlin that will never be built. He traces his finger over the outlines of imaginary streets, whispering names of buildings that will never exist. It's a sad echo of the artist he once wanted to be. Outside, the Soviets close in. Inside, he orders imaginary counterattacks with divisions that no longer exist. The world he built is vanishing, and he retreats deeper into fantasy. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the flickering lights, the muffled explosions, the faint scratching of pencils on maps that no longer matter. The man who once commanded millions now rules only the shadows of a collapsing empire. The air inside the Berlin bunker is thick with smoke, oil, and the smell of damp concrete. You can hear the faint tremor of artillery in the distance, shaking the walls every few seconds. Dust falls from the ceiling like slow rain. Above ground, the city is almost gone, buildings cracked open, streets flooded with debris. Inside, time feels frozen. He sits at the long wooden table in the map room, his shoulders slumped but his uniform still immaculate. Around him, a handful of loyal aides whisper quietly, afraid to speak too loudly. Each report that arrives brings worse news. Soviet troops are only blocks away. The Western Allies are crossing the Elbe. The end that once seemed impossible now surrounds him completely. He refuses to leave the city. Generals plead with him to escape south to the Alps, to form a new defense line, but he shakes his head. "I will not abandon Berlin," he says firmly. It's one of the last decisions he makes with full clarity. Historians still argue whether it was courage, pride, or despair that kept him there. The bunker itself feels like another world. There are narrow corridors, flickering lamps, and rooms packed with typewriters, maps, and coffee cups gone cold. Secretaries move quietly, keeping to routine even as the world above collapses. In one corner, a radio hums softly, broadcasting speeches that few believe anymore. He spends his final days in a strange mixture of denial and ritual. He reviews troop movements on maps that no longer reflect reality. He dictates orders to units that have already been destroyed. At times he seems almost calm, as if he's watching the end of someone else's story. There is a little-known detail from these final days. He spends hours listening to Wagner's operas on an old gramophone, closing his eyes as the music swells. He once said that Wagner captured the soul of Germany. Now, the music fills the bunker like an elegy. As food runs short, he eats only simple meals: rice, vegetable broth, and tea. He avoids alcohol, as always, but chain-smokes cigarettes, something he had once stopped doing long ago. His health has deteriorated. One side of his body trembles and his speech sometimes slurs. His doctor injects him daily with mixtures meant to steady his nerves, but nothing truly helps. The mood among his staff grows tense. Some quietly plan to flee, others, too afraid or too devoted, stay close. Eva Braun, his longtime companion, has come to Berlin against his wishes. She remains cheerful, trying to lift the mood with laughter and smiles, but her eyes betray quiet acceptance. One evening, as shells fall closer, he marries her in a brief ceremony held in the bunker's dim hallway. A civil official reads the vows as two witnesses stand nearby. The moment is strange, solemn, yet hollow. They sign the papers, exchange rings, and then sit down to a modest breakfast of cake and champagne. Outside, the war continues to rage. Historians still debate whether this final gesture was one of love or symbolism, a last attempt to impose order, even in collapse. But to those who witnessed it, it felt more like a farewell to a world already gone. After the wedding, he dictates his last will and political testament. He blames others for the defeats, his generals, his allies, the German people for not being strong enough. He refuses to admit error. Even now, in his last words, there is the same tone of absolute conviction that carried him from the beer halls of Munich to the heart of Europe. A small, haunting moment follows. He walks his dog Blondie for the last time in the bunker corridor. She wags her tail, unaware of the chaos outside. When he returns, his face is pale and silent. Those who see him say he looked older than ever before, as though the weight of years had finally caught up to him all at once. On April 30th, 1945, the city above is in flames. The sound of Soviet artillery is now constant. He eats one last meal with Eva pasta and salad. Afterwards, he retreats to his private room with her. The others wait outside, listening in silence. Moments later, a sharp sound echoes through the bunker. The door remains closed. When it's opened, the man who once ruled a continent is gone. The body is carried outside, doused in gasoline, and burned in the courtyard of the ruined chancellery. The smell of smoke mixes with spring air and falling ash. Historians still debate what he was thinking in those final moments, whether he felt regret, defiance, or nothing at all. Perhaps, in the end, his world had simply shrunk to silence. Above ground, the Red Army takes Berlin. The war in Europe ends within days. Millions lie dead, cities erased, families torn apart. The man who once promised greatness leaves only ruins. A curious fact remains. No one ever found his complete remains. His death was confirmed, but his body vanished into fragments in rumor. Maybe that's fitting, in a way. The image he built was always larger than life, and in death, it dissolved into myth and memory. You linger in that bunker for a final moment, the air thick with smoke and history. The echo of his footsteps fades at last, leaving only silence and the faint hum of the world continuing above. The streets of Berlin are quiet now, save for the distant rumble of artillery finally fading into memory. You walk slowly through the rubble, watching the city's shattered skeleton under a grey sky. What was once a capital of triumph is now a landscape of ash and ruin. The silence is heavy, almost reverent, and you feel the weight of all that is past. In the days after his death, the world begins to untangle the full scale of what occurred. Concentration camps are liberated, cities are rebuilt, and the sheer enormity of loss becomes clearer with every report. Millions of lives vanished, countless families shattered, economies destroyed. And yet, the human spirit slowly begins to rise from the ruins. You notice small signs of life flowers pushing through cracked streets, children laughing amidst rubble, neighbors sharing what little they have left. Historians still argue about the nature of his rise and fall. Some say it was inevitable, a product of social and economic turmoil. Others claim it was the result of charisma, ambition, and a cruel combination of timing and circumstance. You realize it's not just about one man, it's about a whole society shaped by fear, pride, and belief. One little-known detail emerges in the aftermath. Personal diaries, letters, and fragments of his thoughts reveal a man obsessed with destiny, consumed by perfection, and often lonely despite being surrounded by power. The artist who once dreamed of painting masterpieces now exists only in memories and photographs. The public image of the Führer remains monumental, but the private individual, quiet and solitary, is almost unrecognizable. You wander through the ruined Chancellery gardens, imagining him walking here decades ago, planning, arguing, dreaming. There's a strange, uneasy contrast between those grand visions and the reality of what followed: pain, loss, and chaos that stretched across continents. You sense the tension between ambition and consequence, between desire for control and the uncontrollable flow of history. It's difficult not to reflect on the lessons left behind. How easily words, ideas, and symbols can inspire devotion or fear. How a single mind, guided by obsession and reinforced by opportunity, can change the lives of millions. And yet, how fragile that power ultimately is when faced with reality, resilience, and human perseverance. Even in his absence, the echoes remain. Flags, speeches, propaganda, they linger in the archives. And memories, reminders of both the seduction of certainty and the danger of unchecked authority. You see the faces of those who suffered, those who resisted, and those who survived. They remind you that life, no matter how darkly interrupted, continues. And so you breathe slowly, letting the air fill your lungs, feeling the weight of history settle gently. You notice the small, tender details. A cat weaving through the rubble. Sunlight hitting a cracked window just so. A single flower growing in a sidewalk crack. Even in the darkest chapters, small life persists. As you step away from the Chancellery ruins, you feel the gravity of the story. You've witnessed the rise of ambition, the depths of cruelty, and the inevitable fall. But you also feel something softer. The endurance of humanity, the resilience of memory, and the quiet hope that, even after such devastation, the world continues to turn. History, in all its complexity, does not rest, and neither do we. You take a final look at the empty streets, whispering the lessons of power, ambition, and consequence into the soft Berlin wind, letting them fade slowly into a calm, reflective silence. Now, as the city quiets and the echoes of history settle around you, take a moment to breathe deeply. Imagine standing on a street once full of noise, banners, and marches, now silent except for the whisper of wind through the rubble. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the broken facades, and you feel the weight of all that was and all that endures. Think of the small human moments that persist even in the darkest times. A flower sprouting from cracked pavement, a child laughing despite loss, neighbors sharing warmth and bread. These moments are fragile, yet they endure, quietly asserting life against the weight of devastation. You notice the gentle rhythm of a bird's wings overhead, the soft hum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of leaves. Life continues. Reflecting on the story you've walked through, you see the contrast between ambition and consequence, power and humility, pride and reflection. Every choice, every obsession, every gesture has ripples, some gentle, some violent. And yet, even when darkness stretches across the land, light slips through the cracks in unexpected ways. Let your mind soften, letting the streets, the ruins, and the echoes fade into a calm landscape of memory. Imagine the distant past settling into quiet, and with it, the tension and turmoil dissolving into stillness. The human story's loss, survival, and resilience linger like a soft breath. Feel the pace slow. The cityscape blurs gently at the edges. The wind carries a whisper of lessons learned and lessons yet to be understood. Allow yourself to exhale fully, releasing any weight the story may have left behind. History can be heavy, but you are here, grounded, present, and safe. Now, let your thoughts drift, soft and unhurried, like the sun slipping below the horizon. The chapters of ambition, failure, and consequence have passed. All that remains is quiet, reflection, and a gentle awareness that life, in its small, persistent ways, endures.